Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody today to our OPC 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. My name is Pancho Bernasconi. I'm the OPC president. Just want to take a moment and say thank you, everyone, for coming. And it's kind of working and kind of not, so I'll talk loud and enunciate even more. Again, welcome to this presentation. Just a quick 3 thank yous. Bill Holstein, Mickey Warden, and Pete Engardio for setting all this up, having everybody come. Patty Krantz and Chad doing some of the IT work and helping get everything set up. This is not an easy thing to put together, and I'm so delighted at the turnout. It's going to be an amazing afternoon of conversation and remembrance and looking forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill Holstein. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I went out to Hong Kong in January 1979 to cover southern China. I was only 16 years of age at the time, of course. So I go back so far that I meet Barry Cohen in Hong Kong and then later in Beijing. That's how far back I go. So all humor aside, we're here for a very timely, how could it be more timely conversation about China and about America's relationship with it. And it's all over the news. The trade war is imminent, according to some accounts. So our timing today is impeccable. So also I'd like to thank Jared Cohen and his law center at NYU, and Andy Nathan from Columbia, the Weatherhead Institute, and also Susan Jakes from the China File at the Center for U.S.-Chinese Studies, I think it's called. We're so sorry that Orville Shell can't be here with us today. So, with no further ado, Susie, why don't you take it away? First panel is about correspondence who covered the event. And then one of my most important announcements is that, there's a Twitter handle on your program. Those of you who wish to tweet about this event today, please do so. It'll help us buy mind share. And then the second household event, housekeeping event, is we're ending here at 1:45 in an hour. And then we're all progressing upstairs. So this is going to be a complex movement of people upstairs. So please move as fast as you can, because we're going to be starting with video upstairs and the room will be dark. So with no further ado, Susan and panelists, please come up.
I'm Susie Jakes. I am, as Bill said, I'm the editor of an online magazine about China called China File, which is published by the Asia Society's Center on U.S.-China Relations. And those are our 5 readers. This is a panel about covering Tiananmen, the coverage of Tiananmen by foreign correspondents, and I'm actually the only person on this panel who did not cover Tiananmen, and we have 5 really outstanding panelists, so I'm going to keep my comments extremely, extremely brief. We thought that since this is the first panel in a jam-packed day of jam-packed panels, we would just sort of start with some scene setting. And so I've asked each of the panelists to pick one moment, one image that stands out for them from their time covering the events of the spring of 1989, and to describe it vividly and briefly so that we begin the day with a kind of montage, and then we can dig in a little bit. So we're going to start 2 people to my left with Dorinda Elliott, who was covering China for Newsweek magazine in the 80s, and whose coverage of the core part of the story of the Beijing Spring spanned the period, if you don't include what came before, between the death of Hu Yaobang on April 15th in 1989 and then her departure in early May to prepare to give birth to her first child in Hong Kong. So she skipped town pretty early. So we're going to start with her.
Is this working? Yeah. Okay, great. So I wanted to make 3 points, basically. One, I'll start with an image, which is, since you brought in the personal, the image is connected to my first point, which is that I think it's impossible to overstate the kind of idealism and patriotism of that moment on the streets in Beijing in 1989, and it was a moment when even after the Communist Party, or after Zhao Ziyang, I guess, allowed the Chinese newspapers to even cover what was happening on the streets with very sympathetic coverage, even the kind of grannies of Beijing and the old people and people who had been afraid to sort of speak out or say anything, whatever, because they'd been through many 100 flowers blooming and Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, all these things, but there was a moment when they kind of abandoned their disbelief and felt like, oh my God, maybe China will change. And so my personal sort of image, which I just thought of this second, was I was eight and a half months pregnant, and I was, walking with the students covering it from, Beijing University to Tiananmen, and waddling. Okay, thanks a lot, Carol. Waddling. Okay. And I remember people kind of saying, oh my God, protect her, and sort of trying to make room for me, and literally grannies throwing me bags, those plastic triangular bags of milk to say, take care of her, and and people saying, please go tell our story to the world. And so that's my little sort of image, a very, very personal one. I think anybody who was in China at that time, our lives were all permanently changed by that experience, just, living through it. But the other thing, the other 2 points I wanted to make that I think are sometimes forgotten is, and this is, I'm bringing into this the context of having I was there, Adi, my husband, and I were there from 87 to 1990. And so we were covering the sort of build-up and the intellectual ferment and exciting, incredibly exciting intellectual exploration that was going on in 87 and 88 leading up to that. And what I want to say is that it was, the part that I think is forgotten often is that it was a power struggle. And that this was not so much about the students on the street as it was about a power struggle within the inner sanctum of the Communist Party. And I can say that, with confidence because I was spending a lot of time with people like Su Shaozhi, who was the head of the Marxism-Leninism Institute in Beijing, and Yan Jiaqi, who was the head of the Politics Institute in Beijing. And, we would sort of tiptoe around and try to go and see them, and they would say, you have to understand this is a very, very dangerous moment right now in China. These were people who were kind of doing research for Zhao Ziyang and for the liberals within the party, and, they were doing it at great risk. They were studying the West, studying Western liberal democracies and liberal systems and trying to figure out what the head of the Marxism-Leninism Institute, for God's sake, he was trying to sort of make rationale and explain Marxism in the context of globalism and democracy and those kinds of things. So it was definitely a power struggle, and I think that's, it was between the old guard revolutionaries, and I'll never forget the quote from Hu Qiaomu, Mao's old secretary, who allegedly said, if we give the students an inch, we will lose the country. And that was really what the old guard believed at the time. And then my last point, I'm sorry I'm taking so much time, but is that it was a real, my view is that it was a real turning point for China, but not so much the turning point, like the Communist Party will often say, oh my gosh, if we hadn't cracked down on the students, we wouldn't have the prosperity of China today because that allowed us to move forward and grow, etc. I would argue that it was a turning point in the sense that if that hadn't happened, and when Deng Xiaoping went down south in 1992 and called on everybody to basically go out and get rich, that is what led to the distortions that you see in China's society today, the corruption that you see, that it's a society that's obsessed with money, and because they never have been able to develop the kind of software and the sort of kinds of cultural and political reforms that would have been required to kind of come to a healthier society today. So, sorry.
Presumably that's going to be